Okay, I am coming out of podcast retirement. I have been taking a break, but I am so fired up for this topic, Michelle, that I just had to have you on. Hi, are you ready for this?
Yes, thank you for having me on. I'm very ready for this.
Okay, so just to give people a little context, because if you're just like watching on YouTube, they have no idea what we're talking about because this has been living on Instagram and I guess on TikTok. So we're having a little beef with this lady, Beth. And I don't even want this podcast to be about Beth, but it's about the topic that we are talking about. So I think I actually might edit in the clip of the video that she made responding to me just for some context. And yeah, I just want to talk about all foods fit, everything in moderation. There's no such thing as being addicted to sugar. And I'll show the clip here. Three sentences that chap my ass. One, all foods fit. Two, eat everything in moderation. Three, there's no such thing as bad foods. I actually fell for that, all that anti-diet culture bullshit. I gained 40 pounds in 4 months. I was out of control with my food addiction and I couldn't stop. Here's your permission to get rid of the foods that don't make you feel your best. You don't need to include Oreos in your diet if you cannot moderate yourself around them. Some of us need to be abstainers. Just like an alcoholic can't have one drink, a lot of us can't have one donut. And don't let anybody make you feel that you need to moderate those foods to have a healthy relationship with food.
Well, you know what really chaps my fucking ass is when people such as yourself with no fucking nutritional background whatsoever give out nutritional advice. First, all foods do fucking fit. It's called having a healthy relationship with food. And if you don't have a healthy relationship with food, you need to fucking seek some professional help with that. And what's this shit that we shouldn't be moderating? Are you fucking out of your mind? Go have another stick of butter. How's your moderation with that? And excuse me, Miss Ma'am, but there are no bad foods. No food is good or bad. Food doesn't have any moral fucking value. Why are you putting food on a fucking pedestal? Food is just fucking food, and some foods are more nutrient dense than others. That's the fucking difference. I don't know if you knew this, but restriction often leads to binging. It's called the restrict binge cycle, you know? But what the fuck would you know about that? You're just someone with your own eating disorder with no nutritional qualifications trying to give out nutritional advice. Doesn't make any fucking sense, so quit your bullshit, okay?
And now that they've watched it, we'll get right into it. So, hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you once again for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this because as you know, I'm a traditionally trained dietitian. I went through the traditional program, so I have that background of seeing how dietitians are trained and how kind of that traditional line of thinking goes. And now obviously as somebody who's not only healed myself, but also seen, so many people heal with a low carb animal based diet, it's really forced me to look at the science. And I think one of the things that individuals, and we're certainly talking about Beth, but it really is bigger than her. It really is. People struggle growing, evolving, changing their thought patterns. So I'm happy to dive into why that is, what's going on, and just really get into the nuances.
Yeah, I think like the big disconnect we have with this community, if you will, is they don't believe that sugar addiction is real. I think if they believe that, then we probably wouldn't have this issue. We wouldn't be having to have this conversation because they just don't think that. They think that all foods are good and you shouldn't, food doesn't have morality and there's no such thing as bad foods. And I feel like that's where we're not matching up because I mean, it's ridiculous that we can't agree that an Oreo is bad for us. I mean, if you want to eat it, go for you. Go, I used to eat the heck out of some Oreos, but I know better now. So that's kind of like what frustrates me, I think, is like they're so dismissive of us that have struggled with sugar addiction. And they think that we just need to go to therapy so that we can have those foods in moderation. But wouldn't you agree that sugar is a drug and doesn't it light up areas in your brain like cocaine does?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have really good evidence that sugar and even like highly processed carbohydrates, I mean, we're talking about it doesn't necessarily even have to be sugar, it can be cornflakes, not only cause like a rapid increase in blood sugar, but they actually impact the neurotransmitters in your brain. And you know what I think the big disconnect, and we see this with dietitians and other health professionals that say like, You can't tell somebody with an eating disorder, with binge eating disorder, or with bulimia or with anorexia that they can't have Oreos. You know, we can't tell somebody with a potentially dysfunctional relationship with food that they can't eat food. And I mean, you could even extend that to people who are obese or have type 2 diabetes. Like, we can't tell people, but the problem is we are not looking at what these foods do on a few different levels. You know, let me back up. Let's just take like an example, like binge eating disorder. You know, we treat these disorders like they're psychiatric disorders. I mean, that's basically what Beth was saying. Like, you need to go to therapy, and once you go to therapy, you'll be able to eat all foods in moderation. These disorders are not psychiatric disorders. They are metabolic psychiatric disorders, meaning if you do not address metabolism, you are guaranteed to relapse. You are guaranteed to fail. In my experience, if you're obese, you're probably going to continue to be obese. If you have type 2 diabetes, it's probably going to get worse. You know, first of all, I guess not first of all, but we also need to define what is food. You know, it literally, Courtney, is somebody's full-time job. We have food scientists. Their job is to make these processed foods, these Oreos, these chips, these cereals, so addictive, you know, that it lights, it's called the bliss point. It has just enough sugar, just enough fat, just enough salt, that it literally prevents your brain from that. It kind of cuts off that feedback mechanism that you do not stop eating them. It tells your brain, keep eating, keep eating, keep eating. You know, they mock you in the marketing, you know, once you pop, you can't stop, but you can eat just one. You know, we don't have that with Whole Foods, right? It's pretty rare to eat like a very large steak, you know, like a 16-ounce steak, and be like, oh my God, I want another one. You know, there's feedback mechanisms that tell your body I'm full. You know, steak has all kinds of protein and vitamins and minerals, and your body has that feedback loop. But with these processed foods, it doesn't have that. And it definitely is a bit individual in how much can a person tolerate. You know, some people, you know, people will say like, oh, when I was young, I ate cereal, I ate this, I ate that. These foods are moving at the rate of technology. You know, when I was young, I didn't have a cell phone. Now I have a cell phone and a laptop. You know, foods are now being created in a way, you know, these processed foods, these ultra processed foods, that you don't stand a chance. The average American does not stand a chance. And we're seeing that, you know, right now, in the United States, 93% of us are metabolically unhealthy. Only 7% of us, and they define metabolically unhealthy as, you know, either obese, type 2 diabetes, have high pressure. And for a dietitian and for a health professional to say like, oh, if you can't eat chocolate cake or you can't eat these things in moderation, you have a problem, is very ignorant. Once again, it completely ignores metabolism. These foods have a powerful impact on your hormones, on your neurotransmitters. You know, these are biologically wired things that these processed foods are basically, you know, kind of just to some degree short circuiting.
So how come they're not like seeing that? Like, why? I guess I just don't understand why they don't see that, because it's like we're not arguing over like sweet potatoes and broccoli. Like, they are defending donuts. Like, they want us. I mean, and this is them. Like, I'm in the comments of this video seeing what people are saying. They want us to go to therapy to be able to manage and handle our binge eating so we can have donuts in moderation. Like, and that's just wild to me. And it's like, I just I can't grasp like where they're coming from and why they don't see. I mean, look around, like this world is fat and, you know, and sick. So clearly there is an addiction. You know, they're like, "Oh, people aren't standing on the corner trying to get bags of sugar." And it's like, "But no, but if you look around, like people are clearly addicted." So like how do we fix this?
Because they're not standing on the corner getting bags of sugar, because you don't have to. You can just walk into your local 7-Eleven to get it, you know? If you couldn't, this is what I tell. If you don't believe, anybody watching this, if you don't believe that sugar and processed foods is addicting, go ask your mother, your neighbor, your friend that you know who drinks cola or eats bread that's obese, and say, you know what, for 1 week, I want you to give this up. Let's just do it together, and listen to their response. I literally had a woman when I worked in the clinic told me she would rather die than give up cake. I had a woman at the last place I worked at tell me if I touched her soda, she would break both of my arms. These foods, but here's the thing, when you become a dietitian, there are 3 things that are really drilled in your head. 1, all foods fit. You know, and why is that? Why are we telling the nutrition professionals that all foods fit? Well, the Academy of Nutrition, the governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by processed foods. And it's moved a bit. When I first became a dietitian, it was Coca-Cola, Soy Joy, Frito-Lay. Now it's Abbott who makes Ensure. Soy is still, of course, a big one. General Mills, and General Mills has bought a lot of the companies. So there's a lot of processed foods now kind of under that General Mills umbrella. And so these companies have bought basically the institution that controls dietitians education. So they're telling them like, hey, oh, yeah, we want people to be healthy, but moderation is key, and moderation is an arbitrary concept at best and a dangerous, unethical concept because nobody knows what moderation means. And we literally have set people up to where they can't moderate, but then we tell them to moderate. But that's number one, is all foods fit. That's one thing is drilled into us as dietitians. Two is carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. It didn't matter if a patient had type 2 diabetes, which is literally a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. We still have to give them carbs. We just shove medication with it. They're going into kidney failure, carbs, medication. They're massively obese, carbs, medication. Underweight, carbs, overweight, carbs. And then the final thing is that, you and I talked about this a little bit offline, is dietitians are really taught that if anybody tries to talk about nutrition that does not have that RD, that is not a nutrition professional, they should be dismissed immediately. Oh, they've healed themselves, they're a wacko. Oh, they reversed their depression, wacko. And so those are things that I can remember are consistently talked about. And once again, it's sad, now that I'm on the other side of that, I can see, when people get better, you lose clients. It's just a profit-based industry. If we continue to feed people sugar, if we continue to feed people carbs, if we continue to say all things in moderation, we continue to have a population that's going to get sicker, fatter, more depressed. In my experience too, this is another thing that I'm sure you've probably seen. People are not handling stress well. The last mental institution I worked in, it was very challenging. We had adolescents as well. And of course, there's major trauma, but some of the children that were in this facility, you ask them like, well, how did you end up here? Oh, I failed a test. Oh, my boyfriend broke up with me and I decided to take my life. Like this is just life. I mean, you can see this video that we're seeing. And my response to this person, going to somebody and saying like, hey, I'd really like to show you some clinical trials. I'd love to get your feedback. What do you think? And for someone to be so unhinged to go on a rant, it almost has become like a religion to protecting this way of thinking. Because if I'm open to a different way of thinking, if I say, gosh, I was wrong, because, I had to do that as a traditionally trained dietitian, I had to say I was wrong, then that means the advice I was giving was really bad advice. I could have been hurting people. It takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of humility. And a lot of people aren't ready to do that.
Yeah, and that's funny. I mean, definitely this is all like follow the money, like it will lead you to the truth. But she and others do this argument from authority, like I'm not going to listen to you if you don't have these degrees. But then here's you that have these degrees chiming in, immediately dismissive. So it's like they only want the authority figure chiming in if they agree with what they're saying. Otherwise, she didn't want to
Exactly.
hear you out. Like,
And here's the thing, like when I decided to become a speaker and write, I received some very good advice. And this is something that I truly believe to my core. If I am going to speak on a topic, like here we are talking about sugar addiction and talking about processed foods and do all foods fit, I need to understand their argument better than they do. And it's pretty rare, Courtney. Honestly, I'm not sure if I've ever, maybe once, but it's very rare that when I'm debating with somebody or talking with someone that they offer me that same courtesy. Because that takes time, that takes research, that takes, I don't know if you can see the books on my back shelf here, but I have Dr. Greger's How Not to Die. I've read vegan books. I want to understand where they're coming from. I want to look at their studies that they're referencing. But a lot of people this is how I think. And here's the thing too, it's so wild. Like March, they have Registered Dietitian Day. And I'm like, maybe if like our population was doing okay, right? Like we're seeing improvements in chronic disease, a lot of obesity rates are going down, but it's increasing exponentially. Like I can't imagine, like, can you imagine if you were, I don't know, you were a salesperson and you're like, you know what, we $20 billion less dollar sales this quarter. You wouldn't be like, man, we're doing good. Things are just great. We're not changing at all. You'd be like, whoa, holy shit, that's a big problem. And it's interesting to me that we see these people and we even, we have so many clinical trials. This is another thing. Ketogenic diets, they're the most studied diet out there. We have the most published randomized clinical trials on their safety, their efficacy. They work, they're sustainable. It doesn't take, like, my 9-year-old niece can tell you, if you don't eat carbs, your blood sugar doesn't go up. It's not rocket science. But these people have this idea that if I tell somebody to not eat Oreos, that I'm going to cause them to have an eating disorder or create a dysfunctional relationship with food. When in reality, like you were saying, if you are clinging to an idea that intensely, or you feel like you have to have these sugary processed foods to the detriment of your health, and like you and me, it's pretty severe, and like someone like myself, I've never struggled with obesity, but as recently as 2017, I was actively suicidal, so it's serious and it's scary. And you have these professionals telling you that it's not the food, it's you.
Yeah, that's just so frustrating. And sorry if I'm looking down, it's because I'm taking notes so I don't forget to say
No
something
worries.
about it. Yeah, so I mean, let's talk a little bit about like disordered eating because they say we are trading one form of disordered eating for another. So they think that being carnivore or keto or whatever is disordered eating. But you have well, personal experience, but also have like dug deep onto the disordered eating side of things. I know you've talked to our friend Valerie, who overcame, was it anorexic or bulimia
I think
sorry,
a
bulimia?
combination, yeah.
Both? Okay. So yeah, like what do you know all about that then?
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, it just I understand it on just a very basic level. Like when people say like, "Hey, look, you can't ask somebody with a dysfunctional relationship with food not to eat a food or eliminate a food group." Like if you once again, if it was just a psychiatric disorder, that might have some validity. But when we think about eating disorders like anorexia, I mean, that has the highest mortality rate of any or of any psychiatric disorder. Like more people will die of anorexia than depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Really diving into those statistics, it's pretty sad. 20% of those people who die from the disorder, they don't die from the medical complications. They actually take their own life. And having lived through that, I can validate those thoughts and feelings. And so here's the deal. When you're treated with the standard American diet, you're fed all this sugar and all this carbohydrates, you're treating it like a psychiatric disorder. You're not treating it like a metabolic psychiatric disorder. You're not treating it like, hey, there is a fundamental flaw in your metabolism. If we do not treat your metabolism, you are going to relapse. You know, there's a really interesting article I read that was just talking about how people with anorexia will go into treatment, will gain a bunch of weight immediately when they get out of treatment, not like 6 months, a year. They lose weight. It's like this cycle, then they're back in treatment. And so let's talk about these low carbohydrate diets. Like, how in the world can they be effective? How in the world can not eating a quote unquote food group actually be an effective tool for recovery? I like to kind of link it to the disease epilepsy. Babies are born with epilepsy. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't have a bad diet in the womb. It's just a metabolic abnormality in the brain. And so if you feed a child, if actually breast milk is ketogenic, but if you gave a child with epilepsy, formula, they would have a seizure. And so what do? You give them specific ketogenic formulas. Often they'll follow ketogenic diets as children, carbohydrate restricted, high fat, moderate protein diet, and they don't seize. You're using ketones to fuel the brain instead of glucose. A lot of people are not able to effectively process glucose in the brain very well. We're seeing this with bipolar disorder. We just had the first pilot study on that. Put them on ketogenic diets, they're doing much better. So for people with eating disorders, the same thing. All of a sudden, your brain can work. Do you think somebody with anorexia wants to starve themselves? I love the advice. Oh, just eat. Thanks. I didn't think of that. Do you think somebody with binge eating disorder wants to binge, wants to hate themselves, wants
No,
to
it's
do self-injury?
miserable.
Absolutely not. It's the worst. So for somebody to say, oh, it's restrictive, like if you had told me, when I was super, I would have never imagined in a million years, because I was, I've been weight restored for quite a while, but just had chronic anxiety, depression, suicidal, all these mental health issues. And when I changed how I eat, when I started eating all these animal foods, when I ditched all the carbohydrates, and now of course it's a bit nuanced. I have a small amount of carbohydrates in my diet. My brain started working again. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about giving people back the quality of life. I mean, simply stabilizing your blood sugar, we know can be very powerful in the fight against anxiety. And then for people that have gone through cycles of binging and purging, having those high quality animal foods, like finally you have the B12, you have the zinc, you have the folate, your brain is like, thank you, I need these things to function. You have all those neurotransmitters and you're removing something that is actually potentially causing your brain not to work well. And so, there's a very large clinical trial going on right now with ketogenic diets and anorexia. And the results will be out in the fall. I've been told it's very positive. I've published a paper with 3 case studies. Dr. Sethi Shabani and Chris Palmer published a paper with binge eating disorder. And I love that paper. It's one of my favorite papers because, 3 different people from different parts of the US that lifelong binge eating, 20 years of binging and purging every day. And every single person had remission. Every single person and every single person lost weight. They were all morbidly obese. And there's one paragraph, and then I circle and highlight it. I don't think they did a good job. Well, I shouldn't say it. That's not nice, but I would have highlighted it more if I'd written the paper. Is they had statistically significant improvement in mood. I mean, Courtney, so many people today are depressed, are anxious. When you're living in the throes of an eating disorder, words can't do justice to how lonely and depressing and just hard to get through the day it is. So to remove a food group, that's all you want me to do. I'm not going to eat sugar and flour, and I'm going to eat a bunch of delicious steak and butter, and I'm going to have a beautiful quality of life. It has been the greatest 5 years of my life since I've done that. It almost sounds like laughable, to say that it's not. And you see the before and after pictures, of people who have lost, significant amounts of weight, or in the case of anorexia, even gained significant amounts of weight. And it's just these beautiful, glowing humans. But I swear, every person I've talked to, every person I've interviewed, they will tell you, I mean, as incredible as the physical transformation is, the mental health, the ability to be calm. And I mean, life is hard. We're all dealing with stress. Life isn't perfect. But the ability to just function and to wake up and to want to live life, I mean, that's a gift.
Yeah, and that's huge, and that's one of my favorite topics about eating this way is like the mental health. And I never knew it was going to be a benefit I'd have. I wasn't following a lot of influencers when I started eating this way, so I didn't really know what to expect. And now I feel like you see it a lot out there. Like a lot of people are talking, a lot of people have gone off of medications from eating this way. And yeah, it's just been life changing. So I'm curious, how did you see your way out of what you've been taught? Did you experiment on yourself first? Like how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. So, just real quick, if people aren't familiar with me, I was 12. I had a very serious eating disorder, 5 foot tall, 57 pounds, ended up in treatment, tube feeding, weight restored, but constantly anxious and dealt with all kinds of anxiety through my adolescent and adulthood. And I did become an athlete though. And so it really wasn't until 2019, I was eating a very high carbohydrate a high carbohydrate diet. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. And at that time, I'd run 2 hours and 54 minutes, but you had to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes. So I was training a lot, mileage bumped up. And then I had this like week where I was running and my body hurt. I was breaking out in cold sweats. And you think, oh, maybe I'm sick, But after about a week, it didn't get better. It just got worse. And, I got my iron checked. Everything seemed okay. And, I reached out to a couple fellow dietitians and they're like, oh, you need more carbs. You're only eating 350. You should be eating 400 grams of carbs or 450 grams of carbs. For reference, a banana has 25 carbs. That's a lot of food. And, as you can imagine, it made things go from bad to worse. I'd go out for a couple-mile run and I'd just break out in a cold sweat. And then finally, kind of the come to Jesus moment was I was working at the hospital at the time. And I covered different floors. So I covered like oncology, ortho neuro, and the ICU. And we had a young patient pass in oncology. So I came home and I just fell asleep on the couch like mid-afternoon. And I woke up and it was like 2 a.m. and just my body hurt. Like my joints were aching. And I remember just standing in my kitchen and being like, I don't know what to do. I mean, at this point, we're several weeks into this. And I've been taking ibuprofen. I'd been taking some stronger stuff than that. Drinking. I tried conventional, non-conventional. And so I just grabbed my car keys and I drove to 7-Eleven and got 30 pounds of ice and I put it in the bathtub. And so 3 a.m, I'm sitting in this ice bath crying. And Corinne, my wife, came in and was like, maybe you should do something different. And I was like, yes, I'm done running. This is stupid. I'm 36. What am I trying to do? I can't be competitive anymore anyway. And it's funny because, you don't think that those like dark, terrible moments, like if you had told me, yeah, that moment's going to be like a pivotal changing point in your life, I would have been like, get out of here. But yeah, the next day I intuitively knew all these carbs weren't making me feel good, but I'd been so indoctrinated that I was scared. But I was like, all right, Michelle, let's just do a keto diet for a few days, a little extra protein, chill out on the carbs. And then I stumbled on the carnivore diet. And I found there was a few people, carnivore yogi, Sarah Kleiner, and I messaged back and forth quite a bit. She was very kind to give me some information. And I can't tell you exactly why, but it just seemed like, let's do this. Let's do this for 30 days. Let's just do all meat. Let's get rid of the carbs. It made sense to me from a blood sugar stability point. My muscles were just ripped to shreds from all the running. So I thought like, hey, if nothing else, get a little extra protein. And if you can imagine, my partner, Corinne, she was not excited about this. This is eating disorder. Oh, this is going to set you back. So, but yeah, I mean, that's what I did. And then within, of course, the first few days were absolutely miserable. I went from 450 carbs to none. And I would tell anybody, make sure you drink fluid, get those electrolytes. Nobody's told me to have salt. So I was a mess. But within about a week, my pain was gone. Like my muscle pain was gone. And I remember like sitting in a meeting and my dietitian coworker was like kind of getting antsy. And she's like, I got to eat. I got to snack. And I was like, Christy, we're going to eat lunch at like noon, right? And she's like, Michelle, it's 2. And I had never been able to go more than a couple hours without eating. And so I remember being like, wow. And I just wasn't so irritated, dealing with people. I was more calm. And then about 3 weeks into that journey, Corinne beat me home. She usually works longer than I do. And she was sitting on the couch and she's like, hey, I want to talk to you. Like as soon as I walked in the door from work. And, normally that's not ideal. What did I do? What's going on? And she said like, hey, look, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And so that's when we both just sat there and like stared at each other. And we both were like, okay, we have to figure this out. Like she's a scientist. She's super smart. And we both worked at institutions. So when you work at an institution, you most of the time will have access to any clinical trial you want. And so we both just spent, hours just researching and printing and pulling, did you see this? Did you see this? And that's when I was like, this is going to change not just my life, but I naively initially thought I was going to go into my hospital setting and teach it. I was like, this is going to change everybody I work with. So yeah, that was kind of my first thing to light.
Yeah, like they're going to be so receptive.
Oh, they're going to be so excited. Look what we can reverse type 2 diabetes. We don't have to live with it.
Oh my gosh. And then you wrote a book about it. And I'm mad at myself because I know it's either in this stack or this stack. I meant to have it in hand to show. But so how long after that did you write a book about all this?
Yeah. So several weeks just after, I wanted to make sure like I felt really good. I had all the trials. I printed out, everything I had. I had this binder and I even like looked at the protocol because, Dr. Eric Westman and Jeff Bullock and Bickman had already written out what they believed were some really good protocols. So I brought it to the clinical director and they didn't even give me the time of day. And they were just like, oh, that's interesting. No, we follow the guidelines here. Yeah. Okay. And that's when I started to dig deeper and talk to other people, dietitians in the space. And they're like, you'll never be able to teach that. And that's when I was like, okay, well then I'm going to write about it. And, my dietitians I worked with were like, okay, yeah, you're kind of mocking me a little bit like, oh, I'm going to write about it. I'm like, no, I'm really going to write about it. So, every free moment I had, and I was grateful that I stayed in the hospital for a while after that. Cause I was like, I'm going to leverage my time here. I need to learn more, about what's actually going on here. And it became very clear that the goal is not to heal people. We have all the information. It is very clear on how to reverse type 2 diabetes. I'm very grateful. I'm actually working with Dr. Berry and Dr. Westman, and we're going to use some of the awesome recipes from your book to, we're going to create this society that's going to help people. But it's not, Courtney, for a lack of information. And it's also not any one particular doctor and nurse's fault. It's not that they don't care, but you are just so bound by these guidelines. Like they literally told me, like, if you want to prescribe that, if you talk about low carb, you will lose your license. This hospital, for insurance purposes, has to have the standard guidelines. And one time, it was the second time I've been suspended in my professional career.
Love
Well,
it.
the first time was that girl who had chocolate told me, this is back in Colorado, and I walked into the room and she said, she greeted me by saying, I would rather die than give up cake. And I just said, ma'am, you're on your way. And her lab said she was, but that apparently is unprofessional. And I got asked not to return for a few days. And then the second time was I had, because I knew all this, I started going, I will neither confirm nor deny that I started going into patient rooms and saying, hey, this is what I have to teach you. And this is what I will chart that I'm teaching you. Would you like me to tell you what is actually going to help you? And 100% of people said yes. And then one gentleman got very excited about it and told his nurse about it, who told my boss about it. And so it was kind of my last warning there. But yeah, it's interesting that and this is why we continue people to be sick, because, it's very hard to make it on your own. Insurance reimbursement is so poor for dietitians. If I didn't have a partner that had a good job, I don't know what I would do, because since I made a lot less now than I did when I was in the hospital setting, but now I feel like the work I'm doing actually helps people.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't imagine working in healthcare, like knowing what you know and like not like no one's listening and no one cares and you're not allowed to talk about it. Like that's absolutely insane. So I love what you and Dr. Barry are starting to work on. Can you talk a little bit about like what that project is?
Yeah. So right now, the biggest foundation for diabetic, like if you are like, oh, I'm a newly diagnosed diabetic, I need information. The American Diabetes Association is where most people will go. That's where that has a bunch of resources. And it's just like the Academy of Nutrition is sponsored by major food companies and pharmaceuticals. So if you look at their recipes, they all have sugar, they all have carbohydrates. They even say on their website, we don't endorse any diet. It's like, of course you don't. They talk about, their latest article was that they want to destigmatize type 2 diabetes, that it's okay to have type 2 diabetes. We want to embrace people. And, what we believe that our slogan is everybody deserves a normal A1C. Their actual slogan too is connected for life, which I think is so funny. So our goal is to teach people how to reverse type 2 diabetes, how to get off medication. Because what the standard practice for type 2 diabetes is to teach you how to eat carbohydrates throughout the day and then to dose you with insulin throughout the day. And, it's so funny to me because I would see people in the clinic and they would say like, oh yeah, my blood sugar is good. I take my insulin. And I would just say, do you know where your blood sugar goes? It doesn't just go into this magical universe. Just because it's like, if you have type 2 diabetes, I like to put it towards like a analogy of like a hoarder's house. Like there's no room left. Your body is just full of sugar. It's your cells are just full of glucose and glycogen. So what you need to do is you need to, one, stop putting more stuff in, like this hoarder's house, stop putting more glucose in and burn some of that. Go for a walk. Eat protein and fat, let your body use some of that glucose. Because if you continue to take glucose and take medication, once again, it doesn't just evaporate into the universe. It's stored as fat. And depending on your genetics, it's either going to be stored as subcutaneous fat, like the fat on the outside of my arms here, or much more dangerously, visceral fat, the fat around your organs. And that's why type 2 diabetes, type 2 diabetics have a very high risk of heart disease, kidney failure, liver failure. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And it's one of those things that I feel like it's simple, but it's not easy, right? Reducing carbohydrates, eliminating them, focusing on protein and fat. That's a very simple concept. But we live in a world where sugar is everywhere. Processed food is everywhere. Like you were saying, like, oh, I don't, the people are saying, well, it's not like you go to the corner to get sugar, bags of sugar. Yeah, you don't have to. We give it to our children, where obviously it's much more difficult to obtain drugs. And certainly for alcohol, you go to jail if you gave that to a child. So we have a long way to go, as a society. And it's really interesting that just simply suggesting to someone, hey, look, we're not going to be eating foods that cause disease and really exacerbate mental illness, but we're going to be focusing on these nutrient dense foods that fulfill all your vitamin and mineral needs. You're going to be a healthy human. You're going to be fine. Like we're going to do that. Causes so much outrage.
Yeah, because people are deep in their addiction, and that's what's frustrating, that some people don't think it's an addiction. It's like, clearly it is. And
Yeah, that sorry.
no, go I was just yeah, and then, like, what you're saying about the American Diabetes Association website, it's, like, literally how their website is how you can get diabetes. Like, here's a cheesecake recipe, and here's how much insulin you have to take after it. Like, why can't it be the norm, like, what you guys are gonna be doing? Like, why can't everyone do that? Like, how do you not go insane every day? I'm frustrated just knowing, like, what you guys are up against.
Yeah, and I think, I feel like I've had the privilege to work in enough facilities and areas too that I've just seen just how bad it can be. When I worked in mental health, we give just the standard diet because usually in like a mental health facility, they'll have like a option A or option B. Like if you have the capacity, you can circle what you want. So, within like a 2-week period, I went through all the things that they, feed these patients. And the average amount of sugar per day is 38 teaspoons of sugar and I don't know why the patients are going crazy, right? Um, but yeah, I was taught as a dietitian that sugar addiction doesn't exist. There's no such thing. There's no proof. There's no this. And I'll never forget when I was working in the clinic and I had a patient who was obese and she was telling me like, I know it's me and I just can't stop. And I looked at her and I said, it's not you. It's the food. It's you have a problem. You have an and she just started bawling. And she said, "Thank you." She said, "Everybody tells me it's my fault, and every time I say I just don't want to do it, they tell me I have to moderate." And until we as a society wrap our heads around and just treat it like an addiction, then we're going to continue to have a lot of these problems. Sugar and carbohydrate addiction should be respected like alcoholism, like drug addiction. If you are obese and massively obese, you have type 2 diabetes, you have lost the ability to regulate these foods. You no longer can have these foods. And in my perfect world, when you're in a clinic or you're in a facility, we should not give you these foods. But here's the thing, Courtney. The last facility I worked at, the average weight of the patients, you took the mean, was about 420 pounds. And I was required, they were required to have snacks and to have options of snacks in addition to 3 meals. And the minimum amount of carbohydrates in meals was 58 grams, minimum, even for our type 2 diabetics. And so it's like, what do you want me to do? I can't fight the system. And I was, I went to our director and she said, that's the state law. We have to do this. And then, we have to medicate them. So it's like we basically have a system that's set up for people to fail and for people to stay in their addiction.
Yeah, that's just like it's so wild to me, and I make that argument too with alcohol. It's like, okay, so I'm an alcoholic, so how rude if you were to say to me, "Oh, that's so sad you can't just moderate one drink. You should be able to have a glass of wine with dinner." Like, how sad. You need to moderate that. So why can't that, the same thing be about sugar? It's just that people don't think there's a link. And then I even get comments like, "How dare you compare alcohol and drugs to sugar?" I'm like, "It's all the same." And you know what? Sugar was harder for me to quit than drugs and alcohol, but then
It's
that's a
common.
whole, yeah, other thing. But it's just so frustrating.
You're just when you say that, if someone says like, "Oh, sugar addiction doesn't exist," or "Oh, have this," it really devalues that person's struggle and that person's experience. Like, for me, I know if I have anything that has a lot of sugar or flour, I immediately have some mental health struggles and issues. And we have many cases. I mean, and now we have pilots and clinical trials of people with Alzheimer's and people with bipolar disorder. It's like, oh, what do you know? We remove the sugar in the flour and their brain functions better. So it's not that this isn't known, but it's been so indoctrinated and it's become such a cultural thing that it's just not it's not respected. And like I said, I kind of could maybe I could get it if it's like, well, as a population, we're getting healthier and happier and look at it, but it's like, my God, and it's not happening at a slow rate. I mean, in the last 40 years, we have seen a massive explosion of chronic diseases. Obesity is up, depression is up, all these things are up. And until we I think treat sugar and flours even with that same seriousness, we have to treat this like it's a real problem. You have to get this out of your house. and then you need to have a support system because unfortunately, since we don't treat it like a problem, you're going to be faced with it all the time. Like alcohol. Like I never went to the hospital and was like, there's going to be beer in the nurse's station. It's like that wasn't a problem, or it wasn't going to be like, oh, the DNA is doing coke again. Like it wasn't. I was exposed to it in my job. It didn't go to the gas station and worry about like, oh, they're going to be smoking meth or but everywhere you go, you're exposed to it. So having, the knowledge, having the support, having it's such a hard thing to overcome. And then at the same time, you have all these people telling you it's just in your head and it doesn't exist. So, the average person is up against this like huge, this massive wall to climb. Yeah, it's hard. I think what keeps me going is the success stories that I've seen. When I was writing my book, I remember thinking like, God, what if nobody reads it? What if this is just, what am I doing? I even had a dietitian I work with like pull me aside and was like, don't do this. And I said, don't do what? She said, even if you're right, she's like, you'll never be able to work in the hospital again. And I mean, she wasn't totally wrong, but it's like, what is the purpose of any of this? All I want to do in life is I want to chase my passion and I want to help other people. And you can't do that when you're depressed. You can't do that when you're suffering. And by eating this way, I've been able to heal myself. And then, you can help others. And it's the ripple effect, because you think like, does my advocacy really matter? Well, what if I tell one person or they hear it and then they tell somebody, and even if they're not ready to start today or tomorrow, what if like a year down the road, they're like, oh yeah, I heard about that carnivore diet. Okay, that's interesting. So I really think that's what keeps me going. And I kind of think that's the only way we're going to make change is more grassroots, because I've I've been to Washington, D.C. and I admire people like Nina Teicholz that are doing that policy stuff, but that's so hard. I mean, they own the boards, like those processed food companies. So
Yeah, so it's like, what can we do? Okay, like let's go distribute your book to places.
yeah,
Let's send one to our friend Beth.
Beth, yes.
Because I've even gotten DMs and I've told you, that other dietitians are like, oh my gosh, like I read Michelle's book and it like changed my mind. So it is working for some, just not for all. So we need to try and like wake some more people up. So other than buying your book, which everyone should go do, what are you offering any coaching services? Like what are you
Mhm.
doing right now that we can help support you and utilize your genius?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I do coaching. So I have my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. And so I do, either like one-time coaching or I do like, kind of continuous coaching. I also have a kids book, The Fox Family Food Fight. And, in every copy of my book that I sell, I have a charity that I started called the Protein Project. I believe that people, especially people of low socioeconomic income, are targeted by these processed foods. And, right now, I don't have to tell you that food prices, I mean, everything, especially food prices, are like through the roof. And so for every copy of the book we sell, we donate money. I'm working with a local farmer, Windy River. They're a regenerative farm, and they're able to give me cuts of meat, kind of like the imperfect produce that maybe not be exactly. So it's cheaper. I'm getting like $3 a pound for this amazing beef, and we donate it straight to the food bank. And so it's really cool to see, you drop off 100 pounds of meat and they're just like, people just light up. They want this, and so much of the food and so much of the food in food banks is like rice and cereals and stuff. So that, I'm just really excited and proud about that. But yeah, I think the biggest way you can support me is just keep spreading the message, keep being kind, be kind to each other as much as possible. Don't be a Beth.
Yeah, don't be a Beth. Yeah, we're not even using the name Karen anymore. It's Beth.
No, it's Beth.
Um, can you let everyone know where to find you on social media?
Yeah. So on Instagram, I'm at Run Eat Meat Repeat. I do run again. I guess I
We didn't even talk
I'm,
about that.
I'm
You're
an
running like
ultra
a
runner
marathon a
now.
day.
Yeah, so I do run like a crazy person now, but I really enjoy it. So at Run Eat Meat Repeat, on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD, and then my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net.
Awesome. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks again for having me on.
Bye, everyone.